Hey everyone, it's Andrea. In today's lecture, we're going to be going over 4 articles from this week. The first article that we'll be going over is Reed et al., 2004. The second article we're going to be going over is the Fisher et al., 2004. The third article is the Mazalewski et al., 1983, and then we'll conclude with the Hammond et al., 2011. So if you'd like to go ahead and pull up those 4 articles, you can use them. It'd be good to use them as a reference throughout the lecture. So we're going to start with the Reed et al. Article on the relative contributions of non-contingent reinforcement and escape extinction in the treatment of food refusal. And so previous research on food refusal has suggested that procedures based on negative reinforcement often are effective in the treatment of pediatric feeding disorders. However, the role of positive reinforcement-based procedures remains less clear because the existing research in this area has produced mixed or unclear findings. So Cooper et al. In 1995 reported findings that suggested that positive reinforcement in the form of non-contingent reinforcement might play an important role in the maintenance of food consumption for at least some children. So before we go on, I wanted to discuss non-contingent reinforcement. So non-contingent reinforcement is simply providing free access to whatever type of reinforcer is effective for that individual. So, for example, in this study later on, they used free access to toys while eating during meals as non-contingent reinforcement. Some studies I've read where they had a guy who had a little fanny pack that was full of like grapes and gum, and that was his he had free access to the grapes and gum for non-contingent reinforcement. Another way that you can provide non-contingent reinforcement is to provide free access to attention. So you're always available, always giving somebody attention. And the idea with non-contingent reinforcement is if they already have access to the preferred item, they're probably not going to engage in a problem behavior to gain access to that item because they already have it. So non-contingent reinforcement is typically used as an antecedent manipulation to prevent problem behavior from occurring, even though it is a reinforcement procedure, which is technically a consequence procedure. So they looked at positive reinforcement in the form of NCR to see if it plays an important role in food consumption. So therefore, the purpose of the current study was to extend the work of Cooper et al. On the effects of non-contingent reinforcement and the treatment of feeding problems. And if you ever get a chance, just as a side note, if you ever go to a conference and you get a chance to see this team, they usually have some pretty interesting and pretty cool presentations. A lot of times there's videos of the actual kids, the participants, and you can see you can see the procedures that they do, the feeding and procedures, the NCR, all the stuff that they do with the treatment of the feeding disorders, and it's just pretty cool. Some of my favorite presentations. So 4 children were included in the study who all displayed various types of problem behaviors with feeding. The major dependent variable were acceptance, inappropriate behaviors, and negative vocalizations. The independent variable was the non-contingent reinforcement and the escape extinction. They used a multi-element design to evaluate acceptance, inappropriate behavior, and negative vocalizations in the escape baseline versus non-contingent reinforcement plus escape conditions. A multi-element design was used to examine acceptance, inappropriate behaviors, and negative vocalizations in the escape baseline versus the non-contingent reinforcement plus escape conditions. A reversal design was used to evaluate responding in the presence and the absence of the escape condition. So prior to each session, all of the food was blended and all of the drinks were prepared either using powdered milk or carnation. And the sessions were scheduled to last for 5 minutes. Some sessions did last longer because if any of you have implemented escape extinction before, you know that there's not necessarily any preset time. You're just kind of waiting on the individual to follow through with whatever it is you're having them follow through with. So some of the sessions did last longer than 5 minutes because they waited for the individual to take a bite of the food and actually eat it before they started the next session. During the NCR Plus Escape session, the child was allowed free access to toys and attention, and the escape procedures were identical to baseline. So during the baseline sessions, they were presented with the food for 30 seconds, and they were provided prompts to take a bite every 30 seconds. And if the child did not take the bite within that 30 seconds, they removed the food and then presented them with a different food for 30 seconds. So during the NCR Plus Escape Extinction, the procedures looked similar to that. Excuse me. During the escape extinction session, the therapist presented the bite every 30 seconds and then held it to the child's lips until they actually ate the food. They also provided them with continuous prompts to take a bite of the food. And then the two conditions were combined. So they looked at the NCR plus the escape extinction to see if they either worked well separately or if they worked better when combined. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up our figures for the Reed et al. Pardon me, it's going to take a second. Okay. So figure 1, you can see sessions are on the x-axis, and on the y-axis it is percentage of session with negative vocalizations, inappropriate behaviors per minute, or percentage of trials with acceptance. Excuse me. So here we have Jensen. And you can see in baseline, they had the escape alternating with the non-contingent reinforcement plus the escape. And during the percentage of trials with acceptance, you can see that both procedures were pretty similar. And the same with the negative vocalizations. We're still seeing low levels of responding. But they do have different inappropriate behaviors per minute in baseline with both sessions, and it's pretty variable. And then they implemented the NCR plus the escape condition versus the escape condition. And you can see that during percentage of trials with acceptance that they significantly increased. So they were, both procedures were effective at increasing the percentage of trials with acceptance. So they were more likely going to eat bites of the food with the escape extinction. Inappropriate behaviors per minute did decrease significantly also with both with the NCR plus the escape extinction. And then also the negative vocalizations decreased pretty significantly with it. We see pretty similar results across the rest of the participants. And you can see that overall, in all cases, consumption increased only when escape extinction was implemented, independent of whether non-contingent reinforcement was present or absent. This suggests that positive reinforcers alone are not effective in increasing food acceptance. You have to have some type of escape extinction or some type of extinction procedure in place for it to be effective. We're going to move on to the next article, Fisher et al., 2004. And they looked at enhancing the effects of extinction on attention-maintained behavior through the non-contingent delivery of attention or stimuli identified via a competing stimulus assessment. So they looked at identifying powerful reinforcers can often be challenging with clients who have severe or profound disabilities. And one of the most common methods for identifying reinforcers for persons with severe or profound disabilities is a procedure developed by Pace et al. And they developed a two-step process where the clients are first systematically exposed to 16 stimuli, and then they measured whether each client approached each stimuli or each stimulus. Then they validated the procedure by assessing their reinforcer effectiveness. So not only was it a preferred item, did they tend to navigate towards it, but was it also effective in increasing some type of behavior or skill? So in the current study, they used a concurrent operants paradigm to help determine whether the forced choice method of stimulus presentation might be useful to extend the PACE procedure. So when you're using a forced choice preference assessment, you're typically providing two items and you're saying pick one. So they're forced to pick one of the two items, hence the name forced choice. So the subjects were ages 2 to 10 who all had intellectual disabilities, and all sessions were conducted in their individual treatment rooms. IOA was conducted for 80.2% of the sessions, and the average IOA ranged anywhere from 89% to 98%. In phase 1, the researchers conducted the Pace et al. Procedure with the forced choice procedure. And then in phase 2, two types of stimuli were compared. So in the first procedure, they were able to see that high stimuli, which is stimuli approached on at least 80% of the trials on both stimulus preference and forced choice assessments. And then there was SP high stimuli, which stimuli was approached on at least 80% of stimulus preference trials and 60% of fewer forced choice trials. Then they implemented a treatment where they prompted the child to sit in a chair or in a square, or in a square, and they provided access to the reinforcement contingent on staying in the square or staying in the chair. So overall, the results of this study suggest that the forced choice assessment has a good concurrent validity. That the stimulus preference assessment tends to identify stimuli as highly preferred too often. This may occur because the stimuli are presented individually and alternative stimuli are not available to the client. So although the forced choice format appears to be a useful extension of the Pace et al. 1985 procedure, the original procedure may still be preferable with extremely low-functioning individuals who have difficulty making reliable choice responses. This brings us to our fourth article for the week that we're going to look at, the Mazalesky et al. 1993. So self-injurious behavior is a very serious problem exhibited by many individuals with developmental disabilities. SIB is often maintained by variables in the environment and primarily by primary reinforcement delivered by teachers, parents, and other caregivers. It's not to say that at times SIB isn't maintained by medical, and you should always check out the medical, or you should always rule out the medical causes first before assuming that environmental variables come into play with SIB. But overall, mainly research demonstrates that it's more likely going to be maintained by events or variables within the environment. So the current study, several methods have been used to decrease SIB, one of them being differential reinforcement of other behavior. So the current study examined the effects of DRO with and without an extinction component, because typically when you use any kind of DRA, DRO, or DRI procedure, it's the reinforcement procedure combined with extinction is kind of the rule of thumb to determine to have it be the most effective. So this study wanted to break them apart and see, is it really necessary to have both procedures combined? So the subjects were 3 women living in a state residential facility between the ages of 32 and 42, and they all engaged in pretty severe levels of self-injurious behavior. All sessions were conducted at a day program for the treatment of self-injurious behavior. So they first conducted a preference assessment because we have to identify reinforcers or potential reinforcers. Then they exposed each subject to a series of DRO conditions in which reinforcement and extinction components were varied in individual reversal designs. So let's go ahead and pull up the figures for Mazalewski. So we can see with in figure 1 with Diane, we have sessions on the x-axis and responses per minute on the y-axis. And they first start with reinforcement alone condition, and you can see that responding is variable and pretty high, anywhere from 10 to 15 instances per minute. Then they implemented the DRO plus extinction condition, and you can see that the behavior immediately dropped to almost near zero levels. So they did the reversal to the reinforcement condition, and the behavior increases back up to the same levels that it was before, and they reverse back using the DRO plus extinction, and you can see that problem behavior decreases significantly. So then if we look down at figure 2, we have Brenda, and in baseline is just reinforcement condition. And then you can see that the responding is high, anywhere between 10 to 15 instances of SIB during baseline. Then they look at the DRO plus extinction, and you can see that the behavior decreases pretty significantly. They do a reversal back to the reinforcement. Behavior goes back to previous levels of responding. And then they do extinction alone. So now they're not implementing the DRO procedure, and you can see that the behavior does reduce back to the same rates that are comparable to the DRO plus extinction. So then they go and they implement the DRO procedure alone and remove the extinction, and the behavior is at the same rate of responding, suggesting that it doesn't matter if you use DRO or extinction or them combined. Specifically with Brenda, all of those will result in low rates. So then we can move on to Bonnie, figure 3. And during the reinforcement condition, her problem behavior is variable and at pretty high rates per minute. They implemented the extinction, and her behavior immediately decreased to low rates of responding. And then they did the DRO condition, and we have quite different results from the first 2 participants. And DRO alone was not effective in reducing her problem behavior. So they implemented the DRO plus extinction, and it was effective. So it'd be interesting to see another couple of reversal phases in this to see if we can replicate that extinction procedure and replicate just the DRO procedure, because it may be that the reason the DRO plus extinction produce low rates of responding is it's really mainly the function of the extinction procedure, and the DRO is just kind of an additive there that's not, we don't really know if that variable is actually decreasing the problem behavior. So overall, the results in this study suggest that the effectiveness of a DRO contingency in reducing SIB maintained by socially mediated positive reinforcement is due to the extinction process, not necessarily due to the DRO process. So our last study that we're going to be looking at for this particular lecture is going to be Hammond et al. 2011. And so they also were looking at differential schedules of differential reinforcement of other schedules. And they looked at DRO schedules are used frequently to treat a wide range of problem behaviors. The most common variation of DRO is interval DRO, in which the reinforcer is delivered at the end of the interval during which the target behavior did not occur. So during interval DRO, the target behavior needs to remain absent for the entire interval in order for the individual to gain access to that reinforcement. However, an interval DRO does have some limitations. Some of the limitations include low rates of reinforcement and extinction-induced side effects. So you could possibly see some additional problem behaviors as a result of an extinction burst. So then, as an alternative, we can have momentary differential reinforcement of other behavior. And momentary DRO is when, by the time that the interval has passed, if the individual is engaging in that problem behavior on the second of the end of the interval, they do not receive reinforcement. But if the individual is not engaging in the problem behavior on the second at the end of the interval, they do gain access to reinforcement. So they may, let's say it's a 10-second interval and they engage in the problem behavior at 5 seconds, but then demonstrate zero responding of problem behavior for the remaining 5 seconds. And on second 10, they still have zero levels of responding of problem behavior. Then they get the opportunity to gain access to the reinforcement. So previous research on momentary DRO has found negative and mixed results as to its effectiveness. So the purpose of this study was to systematically examine the effects of signaling procedures in a fixed momentary DRO schedules. So the subjects included 4 individuals who attended a school for special needs, and all subjects had been referred for assessment and treatment of problem behavior and were selected for inclusion in this study based on the results of their functional analyses. So the primary dependent measures were the number of responses per minute of problem behavior and the percentage of programmed reinforcers earned by the subjects during each DRO condition. Data was collected on several experimenter behaviors also. Data was collected on attention delivery, so how often did they provide attention, their prompting abilities, escape, tangible delivery, and signal display. IOA was collected for 39% of the sessions, and 39% of the FA sessions and 38% of the treatment sessions. And IOA ranged anywhere from 97 to 100% across participants. So during the FA, they conducted a typical FA, and they found out that the results of the functional analysis varied across individuals, but they were able to demonstrate clear differentiated results for all 4 individuals. So if we looked to figure 1, you can see with Seth, the possible function of his problem behavior was in the demand condition. The possible function for Alex was in the tangible condition, Curtis was in the tangible condition, and Abby was in the tangible condition. So 3 out of the 4 participants engaged in problem behaviors to gain access to preferred items, and then 1 out of the 4 participants engaged in problem behaviors to escape non-preferred activities. So then during the phase 2, they did an analysis of signaled and unsignaled FMDROs. And the baseline consisted of the tangible condition from the functional analysis, and reinforcers included a toy box or videotapes. So they evaluated 2 variations of the FMDRO, signaled and unsignaled, which we talked about. And both signals shared the following features. All sessions were conducted in the same location. The experimenter did not describe the contingencies at any time prior to or during the session. They did use a handheld silent timer to monitor the passage of time. And they delivered the reinforcement contingent on the absence of problem behavior at the precise section that the interval clocked out. And then during the signaled FMDRO, the experimenter covertly held the reinforcer to ensure that it could be delivered quickly, but that no additional movements might inadvertently signal the end of the interval. And then 3 seconds prior to the end of the interval, the experimenter positioned himself so that he could signal the impending reinforcement delivery by holding the reinforcer above her head. And if no problem behavior was occurring at the end of that interval, then the participant gained access to that reinforcer for 30 seconds. So let's go ahead and look at the results. We have sessions on the x-axis and problem behavior per minute on the y-axis. You can see during the baseline condition, problem behavior was anywhere from 1 to 4 instances for both participants. Yeah, Seth and Alex, for both participants. And then during the signaled DRO, you can see that the reinforcement remained pretty high for both conditions, and that the problem behavior decreased pretty significantly to low levels. Then they reversed back to baseline, and you can see that the problem behaviors returned back to baseline level responding. And then they implemented the signal DRO again, and you can see the same results, suggesting that the signal DRO was effective in reducing problem behavior. And then they compared signal DRO. If we look at figure 3, signal DRO to unsignaled DRO, and with Curtis, you can see that his responding was pretty much the same regardless of the signaled or the unsignaled DRO. And then if you look at Abby, during the signaled DRO, she engaged in higher levels of problem behavior, but her problem behavior did start to decrease during the unsignaled DRO. So overall, the results of this study did show that the FMDRO can be an effective treatment for problem behavior, but the signals correlated with the interval termination may have detrimental effects because they facilitate discrimination of the momentary nature of the contingency. So this concludes our lecture for today on the 4 articles, and have a great day.